A few years ago, I was riding my motorcycle on Route 250 near Tappan Lake when I just happened to notice a little homemade memorial alongside the road. The name painted on that cross jumped out at me. It was Rick Brown. Whoa. I had to turn around and go back and take a closer look at that. Was God trying to tell me something? I mean, after all, it was strange that I saw it in the first place, traveling that in excess of over 70 miles an hour, and it was just kind of tucked away on the side of the road. Okay, God, I'll slow down. I was driving pretty fast. And I'm sorry about playing Led Zeppelin on the radio, but it was Stairway to Heaven. What? You'll show me a Stairway to Heaven? Got it, God. From now on, nothing but gospel quartet music. So I went back and investigated. There wasn't anything on the cross except that name and the date of birth and the date of death. I was able to piece together his story over the next year. That fall, Holly and I were visiting the motorcycle memorial wall near Cadiz because I wanted to see the name of a friend of mine, a high school classmate who had died in a bike accident. While we were there, a group was gathering for a memorial ride. The sign said the memorial ride was in the honor of Rick Brown. I wanted to go on that ride, but we were on a pretty tight schedule and we weren't going to be able to make it, and so we had to pass. The next spring, I was in a bike shop in Canton getting new tires for my motorcycle, and I met another customer there who just happened to be there at the same time that I was, and he had a memorial patch on his leather jacket that read, you guessed it, Rick Brown. This was starting to get very weird. I had to ask. He told me that the biker was a friend of his who had died in a crash on Route 250 in Tuscarawas County the year before. I introduced myself, told him I had ridden past the marker and turned around and went back and spent a few minutes there. I told him about the memorial ride that we saw forming at the wall. He told me he had been there that day. It was all a little bizarre and a little spooky. Honoring friends is important to us. If they can't be alive, we want their memory to be. And so we frequently honor them with memorials, memorial patches, memorial crosses, memorial stones, memorial events. And it's appropriate for us to do that. Honoring others is actually a biblical virtue. The Bible tells us, I believe it's in Romans 12, to honor others above yourself. But no human deserves the honor that we are to give to God. The first 4 of the 10 commandments address that truth. In those commandments, God is trying to tell us something. Last week, we began a sermon series that will be based upon the first 2 of the 10 commandments. You shall have no other gods before me, and do not make for yourself nor bow down to any idols. I suggested that those 2 commandments are foundational to the rest. They are especially foundational to commandments number 3 and 4, which tell us to do not take the name of the Lord God in vain, and remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. These first 4 commandments all establish and communicate this truth. We are to honor and revere God. The first 2 establish who God is. And commandments number 3 and 4 advise us how we are to treat him with great reverence, with great respect, with great honor, and in worship. Commandment number 3 tells us that we are to honor God's name. Let's read that in Exodus 20, verse 7. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not leave him unpunished who takes his name in vain. We have always defined that commandment as a whole sentence. We have been taught that it means that God's last name is not Dam. we are taught not to use those two words together because that is one of the worst curse phrases we could speak. But we have failed to look closely at the wording of this commandment to understand what it's saying. The key to understanding this commandment is to know what is meant by the words in vain. The word vain is used many times in the scriptures. It means empty of meaning. The idea expressed, therefore, in this commandment is that of using God's name in a meaningless way. To use it in speech in any other way than praying to God or praising God or in some other way honoring Him. So this is telling us that God's name is not intended to be used for expressing our dismay or our shock or our anger. It's too holy for that. And God's name is not intended to be used to emphasize a feeling or accentuate a statement or to amplify a response. It's too holy for that. That's why the New International Version translate that commandment this way: you shall not misuse the name of the Lord. You see, all those false gods were given names by their creators because they could not speak for themselves. But God can speak for Himself. The one true God did speak to mankind, and He revealed His divine name to us. He spoke that name to Moses at the burning bush, calling Himself I Am. We probably think that's an odd name, but it has special meaning. When God introduced Himself as I Am, He was saying, I am the God of existence. Those other gods do not exist, but I do. I am the one true God. And it was also the name that God spoke when He gave the 10 Commandments to Moses, as we read in Exodus 20, verse 2. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. It was a special name God chose for Himself, a holy name, unlike the names of these small g gods. It was holy, so holy that it was not to be misused. So holy it is not to be thrown around casually in a meaningless conversation. God's name is to be treated as a holy name. The ancient Jewish scribes were careful about doing that. They so feared misusing God's name that they would wash their hands and select a new pen every time they wrote it. And they so protected the writing of His name that they never wrote it out in full. They only wrote the consonants, leaving out the vowels, for fear that they would treat His name as just any other common word. They believed His name was too holy for that. His name was only spoken and never written in full. It was spoken only in reverence. It was spoken only on sacred occasions. Consequently, through the centuries and the careful protection of God's holy divine name, that name and its pronunciation has become lost to us. All we have left are the 4 written consonants that the Jewish scribes would write. In Hebrew, it's YHWH. In the English language, that corresponds to our English letters JHVH. And we have added vowels in order to make that into a word, and we've come up with the name Jehovah. But we don't know exactly what vowels were intended to be used, nor where they were to be placed. So this is just a guess on our part. There is life in God's holy name. There is power in God's holy name. There is hope in His holy name. There is protection in His holy name. That's why we read these words in Proverbs 18:10. The name of the Lord is a fortified tower. The righteous run to it and are safe. God's name is special. It is holy. It is to be revered. And so the point of this commandment that God gave is that God is to be so revered that we respect his name and hold it in high esteem. We honor it by speaking it carefully. His name is not to be treated as any other word in our language. It's too holy for that. And so when someone expresses dismay by saying, "Oh my God," they are violating this commandment. And when someone expresses anger by exclaiming, "Jesus Christ," they are violating this commandment. And when someone responds in shock by saying, "Good God," they are violating this commandment. Perhaps some of what I just spoke offends you. It should. We must develop a sensitivity to the use of God's name so that the misuse of it is offensive to our ears. That is revering God. Jesus taught us to revere the name of God and to honor him in that way. In the Lord's Prayer, he taught us to pray, "Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed or holy be your name." We carry his name. When we were baptized into the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Let's live honoring the name of our God. The next commandment tells us that likewise we are to honor God. We are to honor him by honoring his day. Let's read Exodus 20, verse 8. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. This commandment is also about honoring God. Like the previous one, it is designed to keep us from taking that which is holy and using it commonly, using it for common use. This commandment contains a significant explanation. It tells us why the Sabbath is to be kept holy and what that means, as we read in verses 9 through 11. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor your foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. The Sabbath is to be kept holy because God rested from his creative labors on that day. And therefore God intends it to be a day of rest and not of work. To work on that day would be to treat it like any other day. It is not any other day. It is a holy day. Verse 11 tells us that when it said the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. God made it a holy day. Verse 10 tells us that the Sabbath day is to be kept to the Lord. That clarifying phrase is significant. It means that the Sabbath is a day of honoring him, for it is his day. The word holy, as we probably know, indicates something for God's special use. Its synonym, sacred, reminds us of that. If something is sacred, we think that it is superior to the profane and the worldly. If something is sacred, we believe it dwells on a higher plateau than humanity. If something is sacred, we believe it should not be mishandled. If something is sacred, we think it is of divine origin or for divine purposes. And that's true. And it is also true when something is described of as holy. In the scriptures, we are told there are some things that are holy. That is, they are sacred to God. They rise above the worldly. They are not to be mishandled or misused. They do not belong to us. They are intended for God and for his purposes. Here are a few examples. In the scriptures, the tithe, the first 10% of our income, is called holy. It is God's and to be used for his purposes, for financing his work. In the Old Testament, the priests were called holy. They were dedicated to God's service. They were not even given tribal land like the rest of the Israelites. so that to avoid the temptation of them using that land to make a life for themselves, they did not live for themselves. They lived to God. They were dedicated to his purposes. In the scriptures, the Sabbath day is called holy. It is a sacred day intended for his use and not for ours. 40 years after the Ten Commandments were originally given, Moses repeated them to the nation of Israel just before they entered the promised land. And when he repeated those 10 commandments, he made a very slight change regarding the fourth one. Instead of saying, remember the Sabbath day, Moses said, observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. It is not just to be remembered, it is to be observed. Holly and I celebrated our 44th anniversary this past Friday. Had I only remembered it and not observed it by giving her a card or taking her out to dinner and showing her how special she is to me, I would have been in big trouble. I'm pretty sure that is written somewhere in the husband's book of rules, that you are to observe your anniversary. We know that book, don't we, guys? We've never actually read it, but parts of it get quoted to us frequently when we do something really stupid like fail to celebrate our anniversary. You see, it's not enough for us to merely remember our anniversary. We must observe it. Now, maybe you felt like you've accomplished some great feat by simply remembering that date. You have proudly compared yourself to those poor fools who can't even do that. But if all you do on your anniversary is say, honey, I remember. This is a special day. This is our anniversary. And then you don't observe it, you're in big trouble. You have to observe the day by celebrating it. My oldest son somehow learned that lesson early in life. On his 6-month anniversary, he gave his wife 12 dozen roses. Not 12 roses, not a dozen roses, 12 dozen roses on their 6-month anniversary. I told him, son, this is not a sprint, it's a marathon. Pace yourself. After all, how do you top that on your actual anniversary date? Well, he's tried. On their 3rd or 4th anniversary, he took her on a weekend away to a coastal resort. On their 10th anniversary, he wrote a song to her and performed it on social media. He's an overachiever who is making it tough on the rest of us. You don't have to go to those extremes, guys. All you have to do is observe your anniversary. Remember, it's written in the husband's book of rules. Similarly, in God's book of rules, it is written, remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. Observe the Sabbath day. Verse 11, if we go back to that again, tells us that God blessed the Sabbath day to make it holy. That's actually a direct quote from Genesis chapter 2, in which it tells us that God blessed the Sabbath, and it's the very first thing that God blessed. He intended for it to be a special day, a holy day, from the very beginning. Some people in the reading of this 4th commandment focus their attention on the word Sabbath, being the 7th day of the week. They believe that this teaches us that we are actually to worship on Saturday and not on Sunday. They focus on the day instead of on the principle of honoring God with our worship. And it's true that God did rest on the 7th day after 6 days of work, and the Jewish people were instructed to keep the 7th day as their day of worshiping God and resting. They were not to treat it as any common day. As Leviticus 23:3 tells us There are 6 days when you may work, but the seventh day is a day of Sabbath rest, a day of sacred assembly. It is a Sabbath to the Lord. Isaiah 58:13 tells us, keep the Sabbath day holy. Don't pursue your own interests on that day, but enjoy the Sabbath and speak of it with delight as the Lord's holy day. Honor the Sabbath in everything you do on that day, but don't follow your own desires. Some, similar to those who insist that we must worship only on Saturday, focusing on the day instead of on the principle behind it, suggest that since this commandment is about the seventh day, it has no bearing on us as Christians because we worship on the first day of the week. But they are making the same mistake as those who insist we must worship only on that day. And they are inconsistently suggesting that while the other 9 commandments are still relevant to us, this one is not. And so apparently in their world, there are no longer 10 commandments, but 9. The New Testament is clear that the early Christians began worshiping on Sunday. In fact, in the New Testament, Sunday is called the Lord's Day. It received that special designation and became the Christian day of worship because that was the day that Jesus rose from the tomb, Sunday, the first day of the week. And so Sunday has become the Christian Sabbath, a day of rest and worship in honor of our risen Lord for the same reason. And so God's Sabbath laws apply to Sunday or any day of worship set apart for that purpose. Sunday is a holy day. It is not to be considered as common as any other day. It is for God's purposes and not our own. By observing the Lord's day, we honor him. And so when a family routinely uses the Lord's day for any other purpose, they no longer observe it as holy. I don't mean by that when we go on vacation a few weeks out of the year. I mean when worship is traded for other activities on Sunday morning for a period of time. Several years ago, a family who at that time was active in our church told me one Sunday in winter, well, you won't be seeing us for a while because it's wrestling season. And then the father added, and after that, you won't see us again because it becomes baseball season, so we won't be here for a long while. Their 4 sons were all involved in those sports at different age levels, and they were busy trading Sunday worship for Sunday athletics. They were not honoring the Lord. When a family neglects Sunday worship for a season because their 11-year-old is playing on a traveling baseball team or their 9-year-old is on a soccer tournament team, they are not observing the Lord's day. They are violating this commandment. That has become the new cultural standard. And many Christians are being caught up in it. The world now treats Sunday as just another day. It's just another day to do business. It's just another day to schedule a ball game. It's just another day to hold an event. Sunday has faded away as a special day, as a holy day. One writer put it this way: our great-grandparents called it the Holy Sabbath. Our grandparents called it the Sabbath. Our parents called it Sunday. We call it the weekend. In Luke 4:16, we read this. On the Sabbath day, Jesus went into the synagogue, as was his custom. It was the custom of Jesus to worship on God's day. He kept that commandment to honor God. Can we, as his followers, do any less? There is a question we must seriously consider. Since God has done so much for us, can't we at least keep his one day of worship holy? Can't we keep it set aside for his purposes and not our own? Is it so hard for us to honor him in that way? And since God has honored us by recording our name In the book of life, shouldn't we be careful to honor his name by recognizing its holiness and treating it with reverence? We honor God by giving him the consideration he is due. That includes the way we treat his name and the way we treat his day. God calls us to honor him as our God, to give him our life, to give him our all in it.